Right?
Yeah, yeah, I wasn't with the way you talk right eyes with me.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And then I don't want people to think I hate them. Anyway, I took her son. I think I told you. He's still some rock and roll. This was my last section.
That's good advice. That's very good advice. Right?
Now, how are you on there?
So I think we should straighten it out. My name is Charlie Carrish, and welcome to this August 17th meeting of the Planning Commission, City of Charleston. I'm joined by Vice Chairman Harry Lassane, Commission Member Donna Jacobs, Erica Harrison, Laquita Ryan Jenkins, and I'm always going to forget names because you do that.
McKenna Joyce.
McKenna Joyce. So these commission members are volunteers appointed by Charleston City Council. I know you join me in thanking them for their work. The way the meeting will run is I'll read an item into the agenda. Then we'll hear from staff. Welcome to the staff will give us an opinion on the item, describe it. Then we'll hear from an applicant. Then we'll hear from anyone in favor of the application, anyone that may be opposed to the application. Then we'll give the applicant a chance to respond to any opposition. At that time, we'll close the public hearing of that, and the commission members will discuss, make a motion, decide where we put the item. I'd ask everyone to, if you have a cell phone, please put it on silent, turn it off, which I just did in mine, because mine was the first one to go off. And I've asked you, if you speak tonight, you come up to the podium, tell us who you are, if you represent someone. That would be helpful. I asked Mr. Christopher Morgan to introduce any of the staff that will be working with him tonight. And also, I know we had some changes to the agenda, so he'll give us an update on that.
First of all, yeah. for
That time, we'll
here,
close the public hearing for that.
Opportunities, we've had some late breaking
That's-
hurdles. So 179, 181 Fishburne has been deferred by
If you have a cell phone,
313 Ashley, 044 18 Sports,
I've asked you, if you speak tonight, you come up to the podium, tell us who you are, represent.
so if you were here for those.
I'm asking Mr. Christopher Morgan. Y'all all still welcome to come and stay with us. And also, I know we have some changes to the agenda, so he'll
And
give
then
us an
we
update
also
on
have
that.
deferrals of 0 Castleway under planning and development amendment.
Hey, do you want to introduce anyone in the staff?
So I'm Christopher Morgan, Planning Manager, City of Charleston. Molly Jones is here, your transition coordinator. She is helping for attorneys. Bill Overcash is here, who is the planner. Jim Hemphill is getting all our technical issues resolved.
Y'all all still welcome to come and stay with us.
And then Lee Batchelder is here, although I believe Sean is not being served tonight unless he's zero. It's the deferral. But anyway, so yeah, that is who we are.
Great, thank you, Mr. Morgan. Do we have any, I see the item staff update on pending height district changes. Is something you want to update us on?
So, yeah, that was gonna be a little bit more of a discussion. A couple of things have happened. Number one, there was some referrals tonight, but some of that related to, but two, we had city council defer some things last night as well. But coming to you all in September is a amendment to height regulations, and this may be separate of a larger height amendment.
Great,
And I'm gonna
thank you,
go
Mr.
into
Morgan.
that.
Do we have any
Y'all ready
item
for it?
staff update on pending height
You've got
district
some
changes?
slides, so,
Want to update us on?
essentially what this is, we're proposing is part of some other height amendments, but we may separate this one out so it can move a little more quickly. Is we heard from you all, planning commissioners, clearly that you felt like there needed to be some sort of assistance to situations where we have those 2.5-story height windows. And so, what we have drafted, actually, Mr. Rancho ordered this in very fast time frames, and we really appreciate that, is that, it would allow for new principal buildings in the BE zone, AP or BE zone, on flood insurance rate maps that now have 2 stories over a first floor structure that exceeds 6 feet in height, provided the first floor elevation does not exceed the elevation required to meet FEMA and city pre-floor situations. So what this would allow is, in certain circumstances, depending on the elevation of the lot, you could do some parking under it and it wouldn't count as a story, but you would only get 2 stories above it. But we felt like that would help allow character of the 2.5-story height district, but give a little bit of flexibility for those lots that are low. Is it going to help every situation and possibly in some cases that were pinned for recently referred for you? I can't say certainly without more elevation and elevation information, but we feel like it's a good start to help you with some of that situation.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, ma'am.
A number, like for
Jacobs,
example,
you go ahead.
the, When you're saying the consideration for FEMA and Freeport, what do you know, maybe the minimum of that and the maximum of that as far as 6 foot minimum? 8 foot, depending on.
So the city of Charleston requires 2 feet on top of all FEMA flood zones under construction. So, and Lee.
So FEMA could vary, the measurement of
It's going to
FEMA.
vary on where you are in town. But for instance, some of this area of the west side is 8 and 10 zone. And so in those instances, you would have to be your area that you have below
Consideration
structure.
for FEMA.
The lowest structural element would be 12 feet, correct, in the 82. So if you're at, say, elevation 4, that's an 8-foot differential that you can have like a parking zone. Or if you're at 85, that would be a 7-foot differential that you can petition to the parking configuration. Now, there may be other codes that come into play there, but it is, I think, a good effort to help some of these situations. We can't help every situation, so when we start being above that flood zone requirement elevation, then go above that, then we run into all kinds of problems throughout hiking. So that's why it has to say elevation or recognize FEMA elevation.
FEMA plus 2 feet.
Correct.
FEMA plus 10. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll get into detail next month.
And the ordinance will be up for you all.
Yes, sir. And so that was deferred last night for first reading.
Correct.
Okay.
It was part of the whole group of ordinance changes to the hike districts. And the anticipation that in the minimum, you all will have a 2.5-story amendment to you all at your meeting in September. In the perfect world, we'll have all the hike amendments to you, but we need that one to have particular.
Quick time, right? Good, thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Morgan? Thank you, Christopher, for that update. We'll get into detail. And just for the record, rezoning considerations, number 1, so that 179-181 Fishburne Street has been deferred. Rezonings, number 1, 313 Ashley Avenue. Number 2, 0 Orrs Court, and number 3, 18 Orrs Court. Item number 4, 20 Orrs Court have all been deferred, just for the record. So now we're at rezonings number 5, 35, and 37 Pralo Street, Transporter Peninsula, again, that's number 458, 09, 02, 007, approximately point, and just for the record, 0.22 acres request. Rezone is included in its accommodations overlay A1. Ms. Morgan, 1,
So this is a property that is commonly owned to the harbor part of the building. 35 Street. They're no longer there, west edge development. But this site is right over here, just off of Benview Range, across the street from the city, almost directly across the street from the city park gallery that's in this location right here, fronting the waterfront park. It backs up to the Benview Inn, which is right here, so Benview Range, and other commercial buildings in the area and residential buildings that run on the waterfront park down here. The request is to include it in the accommodations overlay, but there is accommodations overlay just to the north here. Of course, here, there's not accommodations overlay to the south. The comprehensive plan calls this area neighborhood designation, so theoretically, accommodations uses could fit within that. It's not some sort of situation where technical concerns or something like that. So this request would be in the form of a comprehensive plan. And the station drives what they have. Maybe there's accommodations to this. As our recommendations, things like that. To give you a little bit more background on the site itself, here is an aerial image that zooms in on it a bit more. Current structure, basically the accommodation property here. Here's a street view of it along Willow Street, and another street view different way on the street from that. This is the housing that has been built, street from the city gallery. This is other commercial buildings that are adjacent nearby, recommendations, other. I was actually going to give you a little bit more background on what it is on the So in 2013, there was a number of there was a big bit of analysis of the accommodations overlay, and at that time in 2013, this property had been in the accommodations overlay. 2013, there were a number of changes and properties were pulled out that there was consensus or not needed to be in the accommodations overlay. I think everybody was feeling like we needed to condense down the areas that accommodations should go in. So the properties that are in red on this map were removed from the accommodations overlay, and this very property is right here in this location. I know where property is possible, but it's right down there. And in that time, this property. And so, and there's a little bit of a single this has been a whole evolution of changes that have gone on from the earliest of the accommodations overlay, which was 1987, when it was very much a kind of blocking kind of designation around town, which got a little bit more refinement and a little bit of shrinking down in 1998. And as more details came online, right down further with this 2013 change, and then get to today, where there have been a few other additions to it that are kind of further afield, shall we say, from the evolution or accommodations overlay. But our recommendations are, because it was pulled out in 2013 as kind of moving the accommodations overlay to the south, a little bit more to a neighborhood again, is for disapproval on this. I know we've heard that there has been some discussion with the surrounding neighborhoods, and I'm sure maybe we'll hear from some of those folks tonight. But our feeling is there's consistency to recommend disapproval, because we typically should try to keep the accommodations overlay in those areas that are already designated.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Pritchard, some others may remember this. Oh, I remember this Colony House restaurant. Anyway, is the applicant here? Ms. Van Sandberg, how are you?
Lindsay Van Slammer, speaking on behalf of the applicant, partners, potential redeveloper of the site. At most of what I was going to tell you all has been gone over, but this is, again, we're asking you all this evening to please consider recommending approval to the council to rezone this. As has been pointed out, this was previously the Harbor Club from the 90s until 2019. Before that, it was the Colony House restaurant since about 1950, I think. So for almost 70 years, this property has been as a commercial use. It's currently zoned as limited business, as are all the surrounding properties. And as Mr. Morgan pointed out, it used to be in the accommodations overlay. So at one point, this needed to consider an area where hospitality use would be appropriate. It directly adjacent to the north is property that's in the A1 overlay and extended north. So I think it's important to point out, and for that is maybe setting a precedent in the future, this wouldn't be any sort of spot zoning. You would just be extending it almost 70 years out. Thing I think is really important to point out, we acknowledge the sensitivity of this request to accommodation. Anything related to accommodation of the overlay control stuff. We know that this it raises a lot of issues and requires a community involvement. Before I get into the community, it's sensitive community overlay, the applicant has undergone. I think it's important just on its face to note that the applicant believes that we come up with a design that actually would satisfy all the criteria. Any sort of approval here or any recommendation for approval if property were rezoned, they would all be for naught because the client's having to determine whether it's viable. So they've engaged a local, a historical consultant because this is historical property. They've engaged a local architectural group familiar with the city's requirements to approve this, and they again believe that they can come up with a design that on its face would comply with city ordinance. But as anyone working in the city and dealing with the housing ordinance, it's not simply that they can satisfy the ordinance on its face, it's also community involvement. So probably most importantly, the applicants engaged with neighborhood groups, the Frenchburg Neighborhood Association. They've spoken with the Condo Association on the environment. They've spoken with reservation against and have met with my understanding from those meetings, anyone that there's no plans that you raised yet, and it's not work of the neighbors and satisfy the ordinance. plan yet for those groups. But the desire of those groups is that this building be utilized. It's been vacant. It is no location in my open living. It's been a commercial use since and so the desire is that the building be utilized, and the position is an accommodation place would be the most viable. Really, to conclude, and we can answer any questions if you guys have, excuse me, commissioners have any more specifics about some of the individual but really to conclude here, based on the commercial history of the property, the fact that it used to be in the accommodations overlay, it's directly adjacent to property that is in the A1 overlay. And so their belief that they can come up with a design, working with community members that would really work for this space and be approved, really to comply with the city's requirements. We're asking that you all receive approval to present this as a
Thank you, Ms. Van Slyke. Does anyone would like to speak? And does anyone have any questions? Not. Would anyone like to speak in favor of the application? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Come on up. We'll hear you better in a minute.
Oh,
Thank you. Does anyone would like to speak? Does anyone have any questions? Speak in favor. If not, you go ahead. You just speak loudly.
I'll speak loudly.
Thank
I'm
you. Yes, ma'am. Come
Stephanie
on up.
Wilson Gentile. I'm the president of the French Quarter Neighborhood Association. We've met a number of times with AJ Capital with their thoughts about this building, and I'll be short and sweet. The building has been abandoned
We'll hear you
for
better.
3 years. It has become an eyesore to the neighborhood. We would much prefer residential units here, obviously, because we are a neighborhood. However, between a vacant, abandoned building that we have to chase the homeless out of versus a boutique hotel, we are in favor and in support of this project. And we know that we'll be working with the applicants to address things like noise, parking, rooftop bar, et cetera. But in the strongest terms, we would like this building utilized, and we are in favor.
Thank you, ma'am, for coming. Anyone else like to speak in favor? Yes, sir. Come on up.
Here, obviously, we are a neighborhood. However,
My name is Scott Benedict. I do represent the owner of the building. I have a commercial agent that's been trying to lease or sell it for the last 3.5, 4
and we
years.
know that
You understand this is a very old building.
address things like noise,
It
parking,
is very hard to
rooftop bar, et
alter.
cetera.
We have put it out there for office use. We put it out there for restaurant use, for special event use,
Yes, sir. Come on up.
and condos and apartments. We have had people look at it for all types of uses. It's not feasible other than a use like an inn, like this. Commercial age building was built in 1813. Yeah, but it's been there for a long time, commercial use. And the stuff across the street, used to be parking lots, everybody remembers that. That came after that building. Colony House obviously had a lot of traffic there. Also, the Harbor Club. I've been in there numerous times where there were hundreds of people. A high-end inn like this would be a greatly reduced traffic load in the neighborhood. Also, AJ Capital, they develop properties all over the world, have very high-end hotels. They plan on putting somewhere around $30 million into the property. Right, that is a lot of money for that square footage. What I've found out in marketing this property, it's either too small or too big. And one of the things about this in 2013, the owner's 82 years old. Traffic loads got dementia, also dementia, and we can't sell, although we can't utilize it other than these folks willing to put the kind of money into it as a small inn. Obviously, it can't be too large because everything's south of Calhoun. What I found out is 50, and I'm not sure how many rooms they've got planned there, but it can't be over 50. Also, probably the quality of people coming in. about this, you're not gonna get slaps, you're not gonna get trouble. These people are gonna be probably spending into the level of the benefit as well. So, you know, as far as traffic, it has a valet parking spot there, so people would be either being Ubered in or valet parking there. You know, it's a beautiful building. It's a, you know, I know they're gonna keep the quality of the building there. We had met with, Lee, were you in that meeting that one time? And his request was to make it into apartments and condos. We tried. And we're not gonna open it back up as a club. We've had two other clubs look at that, and it's not happening. It's just not happening. And my client, he spends almost $80,000 a year in taxes for the building, plus insurance, plus power and water. Something has to be done with this building. And I've been down there numerous times chasing out people from the foyer. We closed off the door. They broke into the building, came into the top one time, chasing out. But I think the building use is going to be, as far as the traffic, is going to be greatly reduced. And the Harbor Club was everything. So in that, also in 2013, my client was never notified that something was even being requested to be changed. I didn't know. He swears that he was never notified, and that was never an issue. So unfortunately, folks, I mean, we'd love to see. By the way, I was a restoration contractor when that building for Harbor Club. I worked on that building. And traffic's no problem about this thing. So, you know, altering it for condos and apartments, it's just how it is. Parking is an issue. People want to live in park right where they are in that campus. So anyhow, I would ask that you consider this in a real way to accept a wonderful group like AJ Capital. I don't know if anybody's a golfer, but they've got a wonderful hotel on the 18th hole of St. Andrews. And that's the kind of quality stuff they have. So, you know, altering and develop condos, you know, part more about their process and talk about parking.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Anyone else like to speak in favor of the application? Is anyone in opposition to the application?
I would ask that you consider this in a real way to accept a wonderful group like AJ Capital.
And Catherine Carroll with the Preservation Society of Charleston. First, we would like to thank the development team for meeting with us earlier in the design development or conceptual development of this project. However, in keeping with our traditional position on expansion of the accommodations overlay zone, the Preservation Society is not supported piecemeal expansions of the accommodations overlay zone, which was intended to provide predictability on the location and size of hotels within the city. As Mr. Morgan outlined, it has even a very granular approach that's been taken as the accommodations industry has evolved over the years. In studying impacts of this request on the character of the district and the community at large, we do urge the commission to hold the line against over-concentration of accommodations because of the times that downtown Charleston faces a significant housing shortage and a loss of neighborhood serving businesses. We certainly understand the arguments made by the applicant and the project team and those in support. As we understand, it's a challenging situation, but we would ask them to recommend this request.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else like to speak in opposition? Thank you.
In studying
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Passion Darley with Historic Wilson Foundation. I'd like to echo my colleagues' comments of the Preservation Society and thank the applicants for bringing their concept to us. HCF is opposed to the including 35 and 37 Palo in the accommodations overlay. As Mr. Morgan pointed out, the property in question is designated as neighborhood in the very recently adopted city plan. As y'all know, that plan is not even a full year old yet. Neighborhood land uses can and should include commercial services and commercial properties. However, as the city plan stipulates, these commercial services must be compatible with the neighborhood, and they must also be of use to the residences. So like a grocery store like Burbidge's, a drugstore, a small neighborhood cafe. And accommodations use is not really a neighborhood compatible service. It doesn't bring neighbors together. It doesn't add value or convenience for residents. And further, I'd add that there's also an overwhelming presence of multiple large hotels in this area, both extant and planned. And in addition to this property poses a threat for monocultural use, serving only visitors to Charleston. Great neighborhoods have a diverse mix of uses that serve residents and visitors alike. And respectfully, HCF would encourage you to recommend this approval.
Thank you,
It
ma'am.
doesn't add value.
Anyone else like to speak in opposition to the application?
And further, I'd add that
Now,
there's
would
also
the
an
applicant like
overwhelming presence of multiple large
Add some words
hotels in this
regarding
area,
opposition.
both extant and planned. And in addition to this
Yes, ma'am.
property, poses a threat for monocultural.
I do, again, I wanted to review the applicant.
Serving only visitors to Charleston.
But deals.
Great neighborhoods have a diverse mix of uses
Really being right
that
next
serve
to
residents
the
and visitors alike. And respectfully,
immediately
HCF would.
and all those properties to the north, and the fact that the
Anyone
neighborhood
else like to speak in opposition to the
designation
application?
is really current city's plan. It does allow for commercial uses. And
Add some words
speaking
regarding
of the
opposition.
diversity in this area,
And
maybe I've worked for 10 years now. It seems to me the city is really encouraging. Yes, it's in the neighborhood area, but also the tourist commercial areas are in this part of the peninsula. So going to approve it somewhere that seems a place to consider it. And that's really all. It just, when it comes to the diversity of uses, you've got residential uses all around here. This will be a small hotel, and I'm not going to turn out certain constraints of the existing building industry. And their decision unilaterally to not increase the height of their plans. So,
Thank you, ma'am. That'll close the public aspect of this. Commission members, comments, questions, motions?
I did have a question, because I think I understood that you all either looked at the possibility of using housing there or condos or apartments, and that there was some type of constraint, and I think I didn't understand what that constraint was.
Tell us who you are when you come up, sir. Thank you.
I'm Scott Edward with State Capital Partners. So we do all mixed use development. So, we could have looked at this building. We did look at this building in multiple different ways. The big thing with residential is that typically you want to park more closer to the place you live, whereas a hotel guest is more willing to do a valet parking solution. And we actually have a parking lot nearby, but it's a few blocks away, so it's important to use the valet. And then the other thing is just the cost. I mean, from a highest and best use perspective, a hotel is going to make you the most money per square foot. And when you think about sort of the constraints of this building and sort of renovating this building and keeping it consistent with its historic fabric, it's expensive, and so I think from that perspective, it also it's just makes sort of a bit prohibitive trying to think about this as residential compared to hotel. And we heard Scott say kind of similar thing, kind of contract background where it's just a tough physical building to turn into apartments. And the other thing is hotel cost.
So there's no, all right, so there's no parking on site, is what you're saying? Or the building, there's no parking available?
And there wasn't for the Harbor Club either. They had valet.
Right. Yeah, and so it's just a much more conducive parking solution to do valet versus like parking outside. There is no parking on site.
Yes, ma'am. Great, thank you.
This from Mr. Morgan. Sorry to interrupt. If you could give us any insight into the removal of the property from the accommodations overlay of 2013. In 2013, this was a thriving, functioning harbor club, so I know this was not a consideration. I'm wondering.
I think that did have a lot to do with it, because some of the other things that were removed, it's hard to read this map here. But the properties that had been developed on Waterfront Park as residential and the city gallery were removed.
If you could give us any insight into the removal of
and then
at this, in 2013, this was thriving, functioning harbor club, so I know this was not a consideration.
But also is other city parking deck and residential here. So I think the idea was to narrow down for things that were not anticipated to be accommodation uses and keep those, just trying to rein in as much as possible.
Give us any.
Any other comments, questions? You know,
In
the way
2013,
I look at this thing, and I look at it and I say, I understand staff's recommendation, I understand the Preservation Society and Historic Charleston. This, in my mind, across from this, the waterfront gallery and things, seems like maybe an ideal place for accommodations. I know the city plan talks about that, has limitations on it because accommodations, we had so much going on with accommodations, there was things in the city plan to be addressed, but you know, see in the plan, we always look at specific items and say, how can this work for nothing in this thing in place? That being said, you know, I'm gonna make a motion to approve. I don't normally make motions, I'm gonna make a motion to approve. I think it would fit. I think it would, in my mind, in there, like galleries, like, an ideal.
I think one of my only comments is that, you know, we went through, I think there's so many tools in the toolbox for any property that we have in the city of Charleston. And one of those tools is our MU ordinance, and we use it to collect a fee. And I'm not suggesting that this is, you know, a prime location, but we also went through the process of amending that ordinance to accommodate for smaller sized dwelling units that are what 275 square feet. I think one of my only comments is that which also you know we went through, you know, I think there's so many and the other part of this is that this building is less than a half a mile away from the Harris Teeter, which places it in walking distance. And so, you know, not only if we were to think about it as being a part of the accommodations overlay, but also in MU, you've got you and the fact that with an MU you also get the benefit of not having to have required parking for residents. That there's just a lot of combinations for the uses of this building, even though the constraints of parking are what they are. And so I would like to support your motion, but I don't know if we really kind of like, you know, really cloud the field on what could be, because I think there's this potential where you can have these matrices of commercial use and the viability of that option, where we want to encourage people to do some more, because we need like 16,000 pieces of housing, and if this is half a mile away from Harris Teeter, and I'm a person who lives and works in downtown and works at city offices or at the kind of like, or at the courthouse or the hotel next door or in the hotel that could possibly be at that location. I think commercial use, we're on track to do something that could actually be beneficial for us as a city as a whole.
Again, just my opinion is with this building where it's okay,
This
the
is
amount of
half a
money,
mile away from
it's
Harris
sure
Teeter,
the workforce housing.
and I'm a person who lives
I
and works in
appreciate what you're saying.
downtown and works at the
Yes, sir.
city offices.
I will actually second your motion because I'm really torn on this. I completely agree with you. I think the best use here
Or in the
for the
hotel.
city, from the city standpoint, would be residential. And I know that was suggested by the neighborhood, and I think the developer investigated that. But because the chairman has made the motion, and I think we deserve to have us take a vote on it, I'm going to second the motion. And one of the reasons that I think that I will support it is because, you know, this has been for a long time a commercial use. It was the Harbor Club when the 2013 new overlay was created. I think if this had been in question at the time, we would have looked a lot harder at shrinking the overlay in that zone. But this is not an area that's lacking residential options. There's a huge condo building across the street. Court Street has housing on it. There is an accommodations use immediately to the north. we're not losing housing stock by, you know, allowing this use.
New overlays created.
I think, you know, and I'm sympathetic to the owner that, you know, I don't know what else you do with this when there's no parking. So anyhow, it's a close question, and I agree with all of the things you pointed out.
There's a motion, I made a motion, second, other comments, questions?
The only comment that I have is I'm in support of Eric's motion in reference to, I wish you to make a motion, but I support her comments that she made in reference to, I'm a, mixed emotions as well on how to really proceed on this, being that I've spent many times evenings at the Harbor Club, and it's a great location, and I do understand the cost factor as well, and I do hear what the community wants. However, I truly believe there needs to be something that the community that's already around it can enjoy and not just have it. I have, I'm in support of Eric's motion. I wish you to make it, but I support her.
I support, I'm on how to really proceed. And I do know that we have, there are tax credits pursuing the kind of development situation. And I do understand the cost factor is really not to hear what the government has money. I didn't believe they just help solve the community that's already around housing crisis. And so I don't know that those sort of credits are fully investigated. And I'm always nervous when thoughtful boundaries are created. On one side of the boundary, there will always be, when you create the accommodation boundary, you'll say there'll always be an accommodations that come right up to the boundary. No matter what kind of overlay you develop, you're always going to have the overlay type on one side of the boundary and the non-overlay type on the other side of the boundary. To me, that's never an excuse to create the boundaries, because the boundary was decided, obviously, for a very specific reason. Because we went through, you know, 3 evolutions. One side of the reason was removed. Yes, it's all limited business. Limited business does support own housing, rezoning to individual kind of housing, which we've been doing, popping in the peninsula to be creative. I would challenge people to look at it ever. I don't believe in this society.
No, I think I'm sort of with everybody else. It's a tricky situation, kind of on the fence. I am going to support the I think just given the considerations for the use of that building, the parking issues, the surrounding, some of the surrounding uses, and I know there's some housing in the surrounding area as well, and then the neighboring comments. I'm in support of
One more comment, and I don't want to belabor this too long. And Ms. Jacobs and I almost always agree. The only reason I disagree with you in this particular case is Mr. Morgan just explained to us why this was removed, and the other properties that were removed from the accommodations overlay in 2013 in this neighborhood were really removed not because the city had any specific problem with accommodations on this site. It was that, you know, it was not contemplated that this would be an accommodations use in the future, because at that time it was the Harbor Club, and the city was just interested in shrinking the accommodations zone. It didn't say, you know, accommodations on this site are really bad and we need to not have them there. It was really just, you know, they identified properties like the city parking garage, you know, on Concord Street, that were really, okay, that's not going to be you know, that's not going to be an accommodations use, so let's take that out. It was the Harbor Club, so let's take that out. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Any other comments?
Just one thing. So I look at it as 2 things. I think there's 2 things that I think that A overlay could work, but also I think changing the base zone to MU could also work too. But I know which one. I know, right? Yeah. So with that, so I think that's what I was just trying to say, is that think about the whole picture rather than just overlay and look at your base zone. That's all I was saying.
Thank you. Anyway, any other comments, questions? If not, we'll take a vote. The motion is to approve the application. I made it second by Singh. All in favor, by saying aye.
But also I think.
All opposed? So, the board in favor?
But I know, I know, yeah,
Thank you.
right, because I'm putting you.
Yeah, some of
Yep.
that.
So I think that that's what I'm just trying to say, is that.
The next item on the agenda is number 6, 92 Crescent Street, Canterbury, Elderville, Peninsula, TMS number 46021, approximately 0.05 acres. Requested zoning from 4-story Old City Heights District to 5-story Old City Heights District. More time. All opposed?
Apologize for the noise.
Would you like, because I'm I might be, you wait when your phone's on, Thomas, would you like me to go out there? Is it my neighborhood?
I hope it's not your husband's.
Would you like me to go out there? I don't think this is.
He's a judge, they don't cause problems with him.
Yeah, I have no problems. No, but in all reality, I don't mind going out there.
Go ahead.
No, if it's, I think what I was,
Go ahead.
is it my neighborhood?
So yes, items at 92 President Street.
I might be, you wait when your phone's on, Thomas, would you like me to go out there? Is it my neighborhood?
Very small lot.
I have no problems. No, but in all reality, I don't mind going out there.
Immediately adjacent to the north is a site that was rezoned to a 5-story on High Street. We have, I believe, some images that show what is going to go there, which was approved by the DAR, off the street, story longer-term height district. To the rear is a 4-story district. However, some of this building is already at 5 stories. And there was a recent rezoning here at the corner of Canada. Recently, probably 3 or 4 years, but that is a 4-story district. But I was looking at a few other things. This is the neighborhood edge, so there's nothing about the plan recommendation that would say that the height request is out of character. Aerial image is shown here. We are looking at height rezoning is already one of the things, and we're going to start having a slide every time we have a height rezoning. You all have seen this for those earlier ones this evening, but it is part of the zoning ordinance that when you're looking to have a higher height district, you have to evaluate within this as a planning commission and council and how you evaluate them on the context of the property, the character of the area, the street widths on the property, whether the request is rezoning here compatible with the surrounding property. And with my explanation is there, I think, from a staff standpoint, I think we're creating justification by the kind of bill and my recommendation with that. But we given the evidence of the parking deck and the building that's going to be next door and the building that's already there, that we can street we've got this image here of the site and square. Here, which we count stories these days. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-story building there. And this nice explanation of the corner, parking next to the street that's 5 or 6 floors. And this is the building that has been approved. This is President Street in the foreground here. This is Cannon Street, and so this is going to be a 5-story building that actually has a partial 6th floor that was that's going to be, I believe it's a student housing development. Very handsome new building that's going to be one of the applications. So here's another view from President's Drive as well. So our recommendation is for approval, and we feel like the plus does criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Pritchett. Mr. Pritchett, let me ask you, were you on this commission or were you on the Board of Zoning Appeals?
Zoning appeal.
Okay. I knew you were. Thank you. Come on up.
So my challenge now is not to mess it up. So this piece of property, kind of into an odd iteration. There was a out parcel there, and these were actually the same piece of property. And in the process of cutting it off, this got missed in the shuffle. It didn't just go with this one when it got rezoned. It's 2,432 square feet exact, and it's 40. That's not what it was. 48 feet 44 inches by roughly 51 feet 15 inches. We're just asking to be consistent with the entire block. I mean, this would be it would be the odd man out really at the end of the day. Everything around it is 5 stories, either zoned that way or just happenstance for buildings that way. So we're just asking to be consistent with everything in the neighborhood, trying to kind of sort of oddly spot zones and rare in an odd way, if you think about it. So we were just asking you to approve it just to bring it in line with everything around it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Anyone like speaking in favor or in opposition to the application? That'll close the public aspect. Ms. Jacobs?
I don't understand that little yellow block that's safe in the zone.
That is correct. This should be exactly what I'm talking
And I
about.
went back, it's the same LLC that we discussed with Leslie to give them time back in September of 2020. And so I'm gonna move for approval.
Mr. Hussein? I'm sorry. Yeah. Second. Okay. Second by Mr. Hussein. Other comments, questions? Not all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? 6 in favor, none opposed. Thank you, Mr. President. Good to see you, sir. As we said, Pam, unit development amendment consideration number 1 is deferred. Subdivision property conversions is reconsideration number 1 deferred. We'll go to zoning. I told the young lady we only got 4 zonings here. We want more next month. But anyway, the first one is 29 Avondale, West Ashley. Chris, first of all, can we take any together?
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, SR1, so you can take those together.
Okay, so we'll read number 1, 2, and 3 in the record, 29 Avondale, West Ashley, TMS number 418-140030. Zoning number 2 is 309 Cessna Avenue, Pond Station, West Ashley, TMS number of zoning 3500900028. Zoning number 3 is 27 Poplar Road, William Terrace, James on, TMS number 34306000174.
Okay, so these are recent annexations that Ms. Jones is bringing to the city for lower taxes and
Better services.
Avondale.
Let's go on.
R4 in Charleston County and SR1 is our closest property. Next one is Cessna, and it's R4 in the county. So that does talk about not going over 4 units in a
Better services.
Property. Together, this one is in William Terrace, and it's 7 Maku. It was also R4 Charleston County. Yes, that's not area. So R4 and I'll show you it's suburban plan and was in the tree. They wanted to block out. Squirrels doing weird things. But yeah, so we're in approval.
Thank you. Well, unless Mr. Batchelder wants to be heard on these, I don't think anybody else will.
I'll move for approval. I second.
Then you got Ms. Harrison, second by Ms. Brian Dickens. All in favor, signify by saying aye. 6 ayes, no opposed. Last item on the agenda comes forward, 1989 Maybank Highway, Woodland Shores, James R. TMS number 343-300-208, roughly 1.52 acres, rest zoning GB. Rest zoning of GB zone James Island Maybank Highway overlay and planned development. That's also the county.
And so this one is a recently developed
Then you got
plan development in Charleston County. That plan development actually traces its origin back to an earlier version of the town of Rhode Island. But also house to long ago story, but anyway, it was a vacant site when the county. It is now
James Island Maybank Highway overlay and
commercial
planned
development.
development.
Our neighborhood is pretty much plan, but commercial aspect of the plan translates most directly to our general business district. Here, the definition. Earlier plan, This is an image of the building that's been built there. There are several different restaurants in it. So I think it's been for lease long those restaurants need that chicken signing
And I don't think anyone wants to be heard. Yes, ma'am.
If it had a plan development in the county, we're losing all of that description just to bring it into GP, is that what I'm?
That is correct.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that none of those things move forward, only the
None of those,
GBs.
because we can't have conditions in our standard districts. Because it was already built, we felt like,
Perfect.
Ms. Jacobs,
Just
is that
want
a
to make
motion
sure,
to
just want
approve?
to make sure there's a motion.
Great, Ms. Jacobs, second by Brian Jacobs.
I'm not gonna jump the gun this time.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
6 and opposed, on one side, opposed. That's the last item. Is any other updates from you, Mr. Moore?
no, we are going to start next month's meeting 30 minutes early.
Right.
That is a formal
So I just want to make sure that none of those things
and
move
then
forward.
we'll go into other items that can come up before you. We have some further items that will not.
Jacobs, is
Just
that
want
a
to make
motion?
sure, just want to make sure.
Great. And it is 5:59, so we can finish that night. Ms. Harrison, yes.
So yesterday, we had city council meeting and they were proposing the new ordinance for enforcement of to create a rental registry. I have no qualms with that. But in the way that they were gonna enforce it, it would have potentially taken off naturally occurring affordable housing and, missing middle pieces for 6 months. But that's not right now, I think, part of their consideration. But my concern was when I started reading it was how the comprehensive plan that we just worked on, which talked about affordable housing, missing middle, naturally occurring, protecting lower income property owners, our resilience piece, our equity piece. As we go forward with ordinances that don't necessarily have to come before us, and that they would be, I would hope that would be, take time to look at our comp plan and how that could be, because I think there could have been a real good path forward, which is if the unruly tenants are moved out, there's a way of getting really good long-term city employees into those same places and helping those owners make those improvements to generate that type of housing for them, so that we're just kind of give the unruly a boot, but get people in there long term. I would hope that.
So I just want to make one note, we meet next month. The only one that may have an approved absence is McKenna, because I think she's due in 3 weeks, so we wish you well.
Congratulations.
We may not see you next month, we hope we see you very soon, though.
I might be able to sneak out of the house, but
Please
say I won't be there.
You're not gonna want to.
We're not gonna let you nap here. Maybe a long meeting. So hopefully everything well, we can do it, and let us know.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Still late. Yeah, appreciate it. I know. Thank God.